18 slides, so it should be a shorter call, but we will go over some of the unusual growing conditions that we've had this year that certainly baffled a lot of analysts. And so I want to go into the introduction, a little bit of a review of our predictions this year and where we are now. So LandViewer June model in our June call was right in line with the USDA predictions back then of 155 bushels per year, per acre. The LandViewer August model then reflected the deteriorating drought conditions. Our model picked up correctly the drought conditions. We downgraded our yield predictions, and we saw other analysts follow that downgrade as well, like LandViewer and other analysts from futures followed the downgrade. In the September, during September, it became apparent that the images of vegetation vigor showed that the corn handled the drought better than expected. We were very nervous about early frosts and the long way the crop still had to go, but conditions are improving, and so we are talking this time a little bit about our model adjustments that we did in response to that. Calling on Randy here to give us a little bit of an update on the ground and what he's seen on crop conditions.
Thanks, Stefan. As I've been talking about all season in our calls, the crop was planted late. It was a month late on the average, some even later than that. Harvest is really just beginning. Some of the early part of the crop is either harvested or being harvested, but everybody's kind of switched to beans now, at least in the South. And as I've always been saying, that the crop needed three things. It needed time, temperature, and water. Fortunately, we've received the time and temperature over most cases. It did, we've had some 80-degree days and higher in late September. Here in first part of October, we've had some very good conditions to finish out the later planted crop. Some areas have received some water to help that along. Many did not. Currently, there is, I think by now, that the crop is pretty well safe from frost damage. If there is any frost, it's going to be minimal to what it can do. Most of the crop is black layered, at least by now, and it will begin to its drying process. The only potential concern would be stalk quality at this point. If harvest is going to last well into November, and there may be stalk quality issues to go along those lines. If we've down here in the southern part of Illinois, we've had a little bit of wind damage to corn. Some have blown down, but I think it's been due more to varietal issues versus anything else. It's been very spotty. So at this point, we've hit all of the things that were needed primarily to ensure a pretty good crop, and I think it has been quite surprising that we've had the weather that we've had, but it's looking really similar to what 2009 looked like when we had a long fall. So, and those crops did quite well. So without further ado, back to you, Stefan.
Yeah. Thanks, Randy. Thank you. So obviously, the surprising conditions are also surprising to a lot of the analysts. We see a big spread out there on predictions. Currently, from 14.15 billion bushels down to 13.2 billion bushel predictions for this year. just gets to show that a lot of the crop is still to be harvested, and there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. But there's going to be a good corn crop. That's for sure. Just want to go back before I turn it over to Ken Copenhagen and just reflect a little bit on what we had seen, earlier on in late May, right? The area that we were most closely following was the border, along Iowa and northern Iowa and southern Minnesota, where we had a lot of ground out fields, and where we, had a lot of prevented planting, late plantings going on. So that was really sort of the very first unusual condition that we've seen this year. And the way we mastered it, we need to keep in mind for future model prediction. Want to turn it over to Ken, who will explain now what happened late in the season to some of the variables.
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. So as Randy alluded to, and certainly everyone has seen, a couple things we've seen this year that have been anomalous that we've taken into account with our new model runs are the top chart that Stefan's showing here is NDVI, which is an indication of how active the vegetation is. And this is only for corn growing areas. We've built a corn mask where we've masked out only areas that are growing corn. And this is the average value for the United States. And you can see that in the past few years, which is typical, we've had, as we head through August, the vegetation vigor in corn declines. It focuses on grain fill. It starts to head towards senescence, so we see this decline. That's very typical. For this year, though, because of the late plantings, I think, and because of some of the lower growing degree values we got in June and earlier in July, we actually saw where that vegetation vigor continued into September, and this is where we saw we had a warmer than normal September, and the corn continued to grow and was able to develop and add additional weight to the kernels. The lower slide is nighttime temperature, and it's not nighttime temperature from the atmosphere. It's nighttime temperature from the corn itself. It's a satellite that passes by at night and measures the temperature of the ground. So it's actually measuring the temperature of corn, and we can see again, typically, the temperature, of course, declines. The temperature of the corn declines as it becomes less active. And this year, as we headed into September, that temperature actually increased. And again, we had kind of a late year. The year was pushed forward because of the late plantings. Some of the satellite images that Stefan had earlier show where typically those bright green areas would be corn that would be growing. That had not established itself yet. And so now we're looking at September the way we would normally look at August, and we can see that the data backs that up. So, Stefan, I'll go ahead and hand it back to you unless there was anything else you wanted me to cover.
Yeah. So the next slide here, again, he's going to go over those variables as well.
Did you want me to go over it, or?
So, I can go over it as well. So, basically, just showing you a little bit more sort of the unusual variables that we're seeing out there for selected areas. The Minnesota August precipitation, was low, obviously very low. The Iowa nighttime temperature that Ken just explained, which is the satellite surface temperature, has a high variability, high standard deviation, which has a negative impact on yield. So we've seen a lot of unusual variables out there throughout this season that are out of the norm. With that, so based on these variables, we have readjusted our model, and I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan, who will walk us through the new updated model.
All right, thank you, Stefan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Terrific. So this slide has the top 10 states ordered by forecasted bushels for 2013. So a month ago we had Illinois up top. This month we believe Iowa will be the top state in terms of bushels. We have seen an improvement in the Iowa yields. We expect to come in at 155, probably plus or minus 7 bushels. But we think that's the right number. Overall, you look down at the bottom row there, the U.S. totals, we're forecasting 88.46 million acres. We're forecasting 13.27 billion bushels, so just a shade under 13.3 billion. We've got a yield of 150 even, but that's probably plus or minus 7 bushels as well. And then we also run some simulations, and so those stochastic forecasts, we're highlighting the median values, which are in line with the multiple linear regression, but we also have a few charts that kind of just shows you the probabilities and shows you the spreads. Next slide. Okay. So we'll start off with Iowa, diving into each state. So the top chart is going to be the yield forecasts, and what we're showing you is how our model performed over the last 6 years, as well as where we've been in 2013 at a couple of different points in time. So 4 points in time: June, August, September, and October. As you look through the past years in Iowa, we usually see a forecast that has stabilized by August and does not bounce around much. And usually the model is extremely dialed in by August. This year has been a little bit unusual, where 2 months ago we had a very pessimistic forecast of 134. It crept up in September. Now 2 months later, with a lot of uncertainty resolved, and the time, temperature, and water coming out more favorably, we again see Iowa coming in at about 155.2, and we do expect that to be fairly close to whatever the final numbers are. Down below, you can see the bushels, like the yields, bouncing around a bit. It's been a scenic route from June, where we were at 2 billion bushels even, and now we're pretty much right back at 2 billion bushels, just a shade under, 6 million bushels under. But again, in looking at past years and how the models perform, we do expect this to be extremely close. We expect this to be within 30 million bushels one way or the other. It'd be surprising if it wasn't, but it could happen. We won't know for a bit, but so that's where Iowa stands. Next slide.
I think they're a little out of order now, the slide. Let's keep going on the state forecast, and then let's go back to the national forecast, okay?
Okay, certainly.
So the next slide, Illinois, should be coming up shortly.
Okay, so Illinois, this is a bright spot, bouncing back in a strong way versus 2012. So 2012, Illinois was at 104 bushels per acre. We have it forecast at 167.3. That's actually been rising from August to September till now, so I'd say that's a very kind of bullish pattern. And we've seen in past years where forecasts are rising, they tend to keep rising. Where they're falling, they tend to keep falling. So Illinois is definitely a good story, and it won't be back to the years of 2007 through 2009 of mid-170s. It's possible, it's just not probable, but 167 is where we're at there. And again, on the lower chart, you can see the bushels. So really just a shade behind Iowa. It's possible, but again, not probable, that Illinois could exceed Iowa for bushels, but they're going to be right there, just a shade under 2 billion for both Iowa and Illinois. And again, that's a huge, huge improvement from a year ago. That's a jump of about 840 million bushels in Illinois alone. So that's definitely part of this year's recovery story. Next slide. Indiana, also a bright spot, also forecast to be up about 70% on yield versus a year ago. So last year, Indiana was at 100 bushels per acre. We've got it forecast at 171.8. and that's been an extremely strong forecast since August, carrying through to September, and now even today we've raised our forecast from just 4 weeks ago. Same story on the bushels, so we expect bushels to come in at 965 million. That's a number that is up from early in summer, and that's going to be up substantially from a year ago. It would actually be a record bushel forecast for Indiana. It looks safe to say that should happen. It's driven partly by acres, but it's also driven by that yield. So the yield may or may not set a record for Indiana, but it looks like the bushels should definitely set a new benchmark there. Next slide. Ohio is the next state we wanted to highlight. We have a forecast of 157.8 bushels per acre, much like forecast by 14 bushels, about 10% since August. So in the last 2 months, we believe that Ohio has firmed up a lot. It's a good story versus a year ago. The bushels should be strong. The bushels look to be the highest that they've been in the last 6 years. So we have a forecast of 571 million bushels for Ohio. That would be about 150 million higher than a year ago. So that's about a 35% increase in Ohio bushels. Next slide. Wisconsin here, we've got a forecast of 155.3 on the yield. It's really stayed in that neighborhood all year. It's been slightly improving each month as we go along, from 148 to 149 to 154, and now we've raised it about another 1% this month. So this is a very, very respectable year for Wisconsin. I mean, there is going to be variability across counties, of course. And we do county-level forecasts. So if that's of interest, we can actually slice and dice and cut out just the counties you're interested in. We can provide probabilities around those, yield forecasts at the county level, bushel forecasts at the county level, as well as historical accuracy. And we have 27 variables that we collect at the county level. But a little tangent there. The lower chart for Wisconsin, bushels look very, very strong, 557 million bushels forecast. So that looks like it should also be the highest it's been in the last 7 years. And that's driven partly by the acres. It is a respectable year for yield, in line with 2009 through 2011, we expect. But more acres being planted there, and so it does look like a very strong bushel forecast.
Okay.
Next slide. Are we going back to the?
I just want to go back to the national forecast now. What all the individual state forecasts mean for the national.
Sure.
Picture. Let's go to the beginning of the national charts. Oh, yeah. There we go with the national.
Is this the first one? Okay. So one thing that we do, and after we've developed this, the regression equations, and we've put in all the 27 variables now that it's the end of the season, we actually run simulations because there's still uncertainty around the forecast, and we can quantify the uncertainty of each of our regression equations for each of our states. We can run this. We actually run the simulation 1,000 times, and this histogram shows you the results of the model. So this is U.S. national yield that we're looking at. We have a median value of 150.7 bushels per acre. So that's a number right in the middle. That's the marker there. 50%, as you look to the left, 25% equals 147.17. So that's saying that 25% of our simulations came out at 147 bushels per acre or less, so to the left of there. So it's still possible that yields are not as healthy as we believe they are, but it's a smaller chance that they would be between that 142 and 147. Likewise, there's upside. So you look at the 75th percentile, 154.89. So that means 75% of our trials were at 154 or less. So there's a 25% chance that we do exceed that. I'm blanking on what the USDA is at right this second, but this just shows you that we do think about this probabilistically and that there is still a range of outcomes that is possible. It's possible we're below 150. It's possible we're above 160. It's just not probable. But if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing with the simulations and see a little bit of more what's under the hood, feel free to reach out to Stefan, and we'd be happy to walk through crystal ball and Monte Carlo simulation and how it can help you to make better decisions, because this can be very helpful as you think about, do we want to be financially hedging? Do we want to be operationally hedging? You know, what is the risk to the decisions that we're making, and how can we include probability, and how can we be more data-driven? Final slide here, or actually 2 more slides for me, but U.S. total bushels. So again, the 50th percentile, 13.25 billion bushels there. So that's really our coin flip number, is 13.25 billion. We think it's equally likely that we are higher, equally likely that we are lower. And to quantify what those likelihoods are, you can see we've highlighted the 25th and the 75th percentile. So we say there's a 25% chance of being below 12.93 billion bushels. We say there's a 25% chance of being above 13.6 billion bushels. So again, we are a little bit different than other folks out there, but I think one of the things we can bring to the table is helping to quantify that uncertainty. And so you can even see on that lower x-axis, it's possible that we hit 14 billion. It's just not probable. It's probably less than a 10% chance, according to our model, that we would hit a number like 14 billion bushels. Finally, the harvest acres. So there is always uncertainty in these things, and we have 6 years of data on 18 top corn states, every single county. What did they plant? What did they harvest? As we run the simulation, we basically randomly sample from those past patterns in harvest percentages by county, and we see how it comes out at the national level. So as we do this, as we randomly pick past values for 1,100 key corn counties, we can begin to see the uncertainty. So there's not as much uncertainty in the harvest acres. The number should be 87.9 million acres harvested. You can see there's a little bit of a spread there, but it's not a big spread, maybe a million acre spread. So that's about a 1.5% spread either way. So a lot tighter grouping in terms of harvest acres and what to expect. And I think this is fairly consistent with what other folks have out there as well. So that's it for me, Stefan.
Yes, thanks, Jonathan.
Sure.
So, you know, I think I just want to give you a little bit of an outlook on what we're doing coming over the winter and into the next year. Sort of the platform we're working on for the next generation LandViewer model. One of the things we're working on is prospective planting predictions. We're running regressions right now on how many acres will grow in corn next year. It's actually the last bullet on the slide. So prospective planting predictions, we're going to inform that discussion next year on upcoming calls. We're working on a pricing mask. We've teamed up with a supplier of regional prices, basis prices, and maps. We're going to do some more intensive crop scouting next year. It's clear that you never have enough crop scouting, so we're going to invest there. We're going to talk about on-farm storage estimates more, and then next year, since we are increasing our crop scouting heavily, we will also inform the soybean model, the soybean current conditions and yield conditions. And then we might go for a bi-weekly higher frequency update call similar to what other analysts do as well. So that's what we have in store going through the winter, and then into the next growing season. So I hope that call was informative, and if we see more updates necessary, we will certainly notify you and invite you for another webinar. But that should conclude the October webinar. Thanks everybody for attending. Have a great day.